think we see some interesting things pop off. One of them is these interesting No Kings protests, and I went out to the San Francisco No Kings protest on June 14th. It was very actually pretty quite a sight, to see so many people come out. The news said that about like 50,000 people were out there in the San Francisco demonstration, but it felt like way more. It felt like way more, but I don't know. I don't have evidence. But I think the estimates are, I think 140,000 people went to demonstrations about the Bay Area, and almost 5 million people participated in No Kings protests around the country. So basically, pretty basically the most people come to a protest in recent memory, right? And so I think that's very clear. They're most significant in recent memory in terms of just raw numbers. But I think, we have to look deeper at the numbers if we really kind of understand the significance of these, right? So if we look at George Floyd, I think that's a good example. I remember participating in those demonstrations with like this feeling that like, oh wait, now things are different. This is like some watershed moment. All the other demonstrations after this point are going to be different now. There's just so much activity. People can't go back to brunch. And then, people immediately went back to brunch shortly after Joe Biden was elected. So I think, we need to look at these demonstrations, look for more than just the metrics. We need to see the politics underpinning these actions and what they're actually pointing toward. Because I think it should be no mystery that the No Kings protest was organized by NGOs like Indivisible, the American Civil Liberties Union, Public Citizen, the 50501 group, and all kinds of liberal nonprofit groups that are just maybe one or two steps removed from the DNC establishment. So it was not a grassroots effort. And even the same way the George Floyd protests were initially. These demonstrations were presented as being grassroots resistance against Trump, but were, intensely funded by the Democratic National Committee. Why does that matter? It matters because of what these do to the character of the protests and what they demand. I think that during George Floyd, the demand was so broad, went from reform to revolution, from simple expressions of anger, to polemics about a liberated world. But what I recall during No Kings, it was much more flat. It was much more patriotic. Organizers literally discouraged foreign flags at the demonstration. It's so wild to be in Civic Center Plaza, and be so accustomed to seeing this place filled with Mexican, Palestinian, Lebanese flags during almost every protest the last 2 years. And then on June 14th, it just filled the brim with U.S. flags and those little prop U.S. Constitution signs, And I think, that's not all bad. But what are these demonstrations calling for? And so my understanding is that the main line that the Dems are pushing here is only peaceful protests, rely on the courts, and vote. And apparently this is all to end fascism, right?
Don't forget, pay them.
Pay them, yeah. Give them money so that they can run the proper candidates. Yes. And so, but none of these people can tell me how that's been going, And it's like, so I think we can all agree that these three things are not going to fight fascism, right? Like if this is fascism, right, the Dems are saying we all need to get our shit together, not worry about all the other shit because we got to fight fascism. Then how are peaceful protests, the courts, and voting going to fight fascism, right? It's totally ridiculous when we actually take it just like face value, right? And if we're fighting fascism, then I think we can also agree that these things, they have not historically worked. And that's a big issue, right? And so I think that goes back to so much of this liberal angle with Trump, is that these DNC types, they may hate Trump, but they're not really sure if they actually hate the things that Trump does. They're not really sure if they oppose all the wars.
I mean, some of them straight up don't. That's it's a typical Democratic Party virtue signaling. Like there are definitely at least one instance of, somebody going on Twitter, basically being like, this ICE stuff is terrible. We need to protect immigrants, and then immediately turns around and votes for the bill.
Yeah,
it's
exactly. Yeah, and so I think because these things what they lack is they lack the basic opposition to U.S. imperialism, right? That's what the big thing. Like, why do we have no foreign flags? Well, because it's America, baby, U.S. imperialism, right? And I think that's the big thing of this DNC opposition to Trump is they oppose these things of Trump, but they don't really oppose the whole imperialism thing. They kind of do. They don't even oppose the war in Palestine. They don't. No DNC serious DNC person rep actually opposes Palestine. That's why they lost the fucking election to Trump.
Big reason why.
Yes, a big reason. I'm sorry, big reason, not the only reason, but a big reason.
Some people might try to paint it like it's the only reason, but there are bigger problems than just that.
And but again, like I don't think the big issue is that okay, like it's a divided thing. Because on
Mm-hmm.
one hand, that so many people showed up. 5 million people across this country showed up. That's a
Yeah, that's a good
significant
amount.
thing, right? What does that mean? It means that there is like a lot of energy addressing this issue.
Mm-hmm.
However, if it's all directed toward things that historically and empirically are proven to not actually affect the situation, then we can see it's not actually getting us to a different place, right? And so, what do? I think we just have to kind of talk about it, right? Because I think if our worst fears are correct, and I think some of them are correct, the administration is only going to do more shit that's going to piss people off. And if, the coalescence of all this mass anger is just around a lot of bullshit, well, I think we as a society have to be like, yo, let's do something different.
Yeah, definitely need to do something different.
Something
I
different.
mean, it's like, yeah, I think you're right about a lot of that. I think, essentially this particular protest, although it was highly successful in a lot of ways, it was, a direct byproduct of what the Dems wanted. Even though like organizations that are like directly affiliated and meet with the Democratic Party, like Indivisible, like Our Revolution, were like shut out a couple months ago. They're still doing these protests, trying to funnel people back into this particular party. And I think like a lot of people who participated in this stuff, they probably do have the mentality that they's like, oh, we love our freedom, we love America, we just don't like it when they do America, we like it when we do whatever the fuck that means. But also at the same time, there were a lot of people who probably showed up and it was their first time, and they were looking for some way to get active. And I think like, it's not a bad thing necessarily if folks are coming out for their first time and they're looking for, some way to get politically active and they're going to like the biggest thing that they see because they feel like it's the safest or whatever. But it also did really seem like it was a big coincidence to me that both of the protests that the 5501 group put on were coinciding at the same time as like other really important protests. I mean, it's like there's the one that happened a couple months ago. There was the big DC mobilization for Palestinian solidarity. When the No Kings protest happened, that was also happening the same day these mobilizations against ICE were happening. It's just like just down Market Street. Like you keep going there and you take a left, like you get to the ICE building where a lot of people were arrested that Sunday or whatnot. And a lot of people were showing up throughout the day, like for 2 straight days, like trying to make sure that like that people didn't go to their quote unquote court appointment, which never happens on the weekend. So they didn't get swept away and like, I don't know, put in a fucking cage somewhere or sent to like El Salvador, and I think it's like, this can only happen so many times before it stops being a coincidence. And I don't want to like dismiss people who are just engaging with some of this stuff. But I also think like, yeah, people have to realize like a lot of this, a lot of what's being presented to them isn't the solution. And they, some folks are going to have to get out of their comfort zone. Some folks just want to stay there and that's fine. But at the same time, I think there's like a lot of young folks out there who generally don't really know what to do. And like there's a lot of older liberal folks who are just like, oh, well, you should run for office. You should be a Democrat. You should, do all these things and we'll support you. We'll stand for you, even if eventually you supposedly do a 180 like AOC did. You're still a Democrat, But I don't know. I mean, I think, yeah, there's definitely some positives out there with this. Definitely a lot to be critical with this particular protest. But hopefully it just leads to more people being activated and being serious about like real, like grassroots, like political change,